Hi, Dr. McLeese here from Better Than the Honeymoon. And I had a question come in that I just want to share with you here on the blog. It's going to be shared on the Ask a Question page as well. So the question is this. This probably boils down to the age-old question, how much sex should we have? I've come to believe that individuals have their own comfort zone or set point with respect to the role of sex in their lives. The challenge arises when the individuals that make up the marriage are at different places. There's nothing wrong with having a low drive and nothing wrong with having a high drive, but if these two people are married, they'll always have this gap between them. So can you advise on actions or intentions that each should attend to minimize conflict in the marriage? So here's the deal. First of all, we want to see if there really is a gap between you or a discrepancy in sex drive. Sometimes couples believe that exists because one will be thinking in their head, well, I'd like to have sex tonight, but they don't approach their spouse for whatever reason, and then just kind of believe, well, my spouse doesn't want to have sex as often as I do. But your spouse may be thinking the exact same thing. So here's a challenge for you. Have your spouse do the same. You can have them watch this video if it feels weird to ask them to do this, but grab you a piece of paper and answer this question. If I could, if I had the time, how often would I have sex in any given week? Write your number down on paper. Don't show it to your spouse yet, because you each need to do this activity. Now, once you've done it, once you've both written your number down, show one another. You might be surprised how closely those numbers actually align with one another. Oftentimes it does. However, if you happen to be in the relationship where there is a significant gap, there are certainly some steps you can take to maybe reduce that gap or at least to work through the conflict that comes about because of this. So first of all, because the age-old question is how much sex should we have, that really does depend on you as a couple and how much sex that you want to have, how often you want to be intimate. If you're looking for kind of like this average number, most research tells us that the average couple has sex somewhere between once and twice a week. So if you're aiming for average, that would be where you're headed. But I would encourage you not to let average be your ideal, but instead let what you two want be your ideal. So let's say that we do have someone that has a significantly higher drive than their spouse. Here are some ways you can handle that. First of all, I want you to understand the viewpoint that each one of you has. So typically, the higher drive person is perceived by the lower drive person as only caring about sex. So that lower drive person a lot of times will think, well, all you want is sex. That's not very intimate. I'm being used. So it can help sometimes to express to your spouse that this goes far beyond just a physical desire. Let them know you're not just looking for an orgasm, but you really are trying to connect with your spouse. Let your spouse know, that you feel lonely when they're not around or not available for intimacy. Let them know that it's part of the way you feel more strongly bonded with them. So use your own words and your own feelings to express to them what sex means to you. Now, for the lower drive spouse, there can be lots of reasons why a lower drive exists. Sometimes it's just because you're tired or because you're lacking energy. If the relationship itself is on the rocks, it can be hard to feel like you want to have sex with one another. If your spouse has told you it hasn't been enjoyable in the past, it can be hard to want to make love. So I would encourage you to sit down as a couple, talk about how often you would like to have sex. And then if there's a significant gap, talk a little bit about what some compromise would look like. I've seen it several times in blogs and in other advice where people will say, well, you never have to have sex with your spouse. And that's true. You never have to do anything with your spouse, really. But we do know that it's part of how God bonds us in marriage, and it's part of how intimacy grows. Now, a lot of times for the lower drive spouse, what's actually happening is there's not a pursuit for sex. They don't necessarily have the drive to seek out sex, but that doesn't mean that they have a lower sex drive. It just means that the way their drive shows is through being pursued. So it may be that your spouse that has a lower drive, and I'm assuming that the higher drive spouse has written in this question, but if your spouse has the lower drive, it could actually be that they just need to be pursued. And so oftentimes the person who is the pursuer naturally will feel like, well, if my spouse wanted sex, they would pursue me. And you kind of expect for your spouse to come to intimacy the same way that you would. But that's not necessarily the case. So you might want to actually ask your spouse about that. Would you pursue me more often? Or how often would you want to have sex? Because you might be surprised how closely their numbers match yours. Now, if there is a significant gap, then for the higher drive spouse, I would encourage you, like I said earlier, be really open. Let your spouse know what sex means to you. And then for the lower drive spouse, allow yourself to engage with your spouse and see if that arousal level comes up while you're actually beginning sexual activity. So if you have more of a desire to be pursued as a lower drive spouse, then what you may actually need is just to make out with your spouse a little more. You might find that cuddling up on the couch or turning off the TV and actually just talking to one another will raise that level of desire for you. So as a couple, one of the things that'll be most helpful is for you guys to figure out what is it that kind of sets the mood for you. What can you do to pursue your spouse, and how does your spouse like to be pursued? If you have a lot of problems in this area and you find that it causes a lot of conflict, I would certainly encourage you to see somebody that can work with you on your marriage. And if you're looking for someone that's a Christian sex therapist, contact me through my website. I'd be more than happy to point you in the right direction and help you find someone in your area. Until then, blessings on you, your marriage, and your sex life. Bye.